Hello, everyone. I'm Susan Stover, VP of Digital Content for FindBiometrics and Mobile ID World. And welcome to Invisible Authentication, how UIX-Focused biometrics can make passwords disappear. For a long time, this term, invisible authentication, was unimaginable. Authentication seemed a friction-heavy process by nature, and the way that we authenticated ourselves in our daily lives reinforced this contradiction. Passwords were only as strong as they were complicated, and adding additional factors meant burdensome keys, tokens, and SMS-based one-time passcodes.
Sure.
But all of that changed with the mainstreaming of biometrics. In 2013, Apple launched Touch ID, its first foray into biometric access, and changed the way the perception of security we think about it. Strong security, strong authentication didn't have to be cumbersome. And as the market followed Apple's lead, we got to experience the evolution of digital identity from coarse and approximate to frictionless and irrefutable. The ecosystem where this evolution occurred was financial services. Payments and banking, areas where users expected high levels of security, was the first end-user touchpoint to prove authentication with biometrics, and it was the key to conducting transactions securely and conveniently. Now, as fintech morphs into its next aspect, thanks to financial inclusion in underserved regions, the rise of cryptocurrency, branchless banking, and naked payments, it's time for biometrics to take their place not only as strong authenticators, but as an integral part of an intuitive user interface. This panel will last 30 minutes, and the topics discussed will carry over to a webinar presented by FindBiometrics and Money2020 on November 13th. You can find more information on findbiometrics.com. I'm honored to host this expert panel today, and if there are any questions from the audience, you can submit them through the Slido app, entering Money2020 and Revolution Rock stage, time permitting.
You want to sit here or there?
So welcome, everyone. And Husayn, I'll start with you down there. What are the foundational pieces that have to be in place to give a user control over their identity?
Great. It's good to be here. And it is a necessary step to ensure everyone does have ownership over their legal identity. On the foundational building blocks, the first, in our view, is that you have to do a good job of taking your offline identity online to give it integrity so that you are sure that the person is who they claim to be and a bad actor can't steal and impersonate someone else. So that's been our focus, taking your government ID and facial biometrics from the offline world to the online world. The second is to ensure that it is convenient and usable. I don't think users care about identity. I don't think they should. I don't think we're going to live in a world where people will understand what a private key is and so on. So it has to be very convenient and frictionless for users to be able to interact and use their identity, hence the invisible piece. And lastly, it has to be cognizant of the fact that privacy has to be at the heart of it. Because in China, they have solved the identity problem in many ways, whether it's WeChat or Ant Financial. It's moderately secure, it's quite convenient, but the privacy part is kind of not in the equation. So we only envisage a world where this would work, where every single person not only owns and controls their identity, but even more important than that is that no one else does. So it's privacy-centric and safe in that sense.
Great. And Rob, the security industry at large has seen a convergence between physical and digital access. How can biometrics protect the integrity of an optimal user experience in the new world of converged physical digital security?
Well, good morning. We're all here for the human. And I heard David just make some comment about, it's actually easy to do a payment if you actually know who's initiating and receiving the payment. Well, it's true for all financial services, and that's whether you're digitally communicating to a financial service or whether you're physically interacting with a financial service. How do we create a world where you can actually be the same person, both digitally and physically? There's a couple of use cases I'd like to just comment about and then talk about the impact of biometrics on that. One is really omni-channel. We've seen a lot of examples where banks are looking for how do I get authentication confirmation across digital channels, my call center channels, as well as my physical bricks and mortar channels? How do I get to the same authentication? The other use case, which is maybe one that you're dealing with, happens to be cybersecurity. Like in the state of New York, the cybersecurity requirements of all financial institutions requires you to have multi-level authentication for digital or third-party access as well as internal access, which would actually require you to be able to unify identity in order to be able to confirm the identity of people getting access to your information systems or access to your customer data. And so biometrics are really a very transparent way of building higher levels of trust of that authentication for both digital and physical events that are occurring within a financial institution.
Great, thank you. So Matt, I want to move over to you. So it's safe to say that the digitalization of identity has reached a critical momentum and that it's imminent. What considerations need to be taken into account when implementing biometrics as identifiers, specifically in terms of privacy and ethics?
Yeah, sure. So Susan, I'd start by saying that it's probably a little bit of an overstatement to say that we've made a critical momentum in this space. I think we have a lot of friction left to go through in order to get to that critical momentum, but it is very accurate to say that IDs are it's imminent that IDs are going to be digitized in the near future. I lead the business that produces about 80% of the driver's license in the US, and the vast majority of the people in this room that have a driver's license will have a mobile driver's license or a digital ID on their phone as an alternate or supplement to that physical driver's license over the next 2 to 3 years. We have 8 to 10 states that are launching that in the next 2 quarters. So yes, it's imminent that we're digitizing IDs, but we still have a ways to go in getting the critical mass around digital identities, at least trusted ones. But as far as what we need to think of in terms of the biometrics related to privacy and ethics, a lot of our approach is around making sure that this is done in a way that the biometric is stored on the citizen or consumer's device. It's under their control, and that the biometric template resides there until the user has consented to using it for a match. And then when it is done, it's done following industry standards like FIDO2, where the biometric match and the cryptography happen on device to initiate the authentication event. So that's one area. Another one is when it is being done centrally, where the company that is storing those biometric templates centrally, that they're very specific in the use cases and the privacy controls, and clear to the end user about what is being stored and how it's being used. And the last consideration I'd say is, at the end of the day, we all have 10 fingers, 1 face, and 2 irises. So we have to remember that when those things are compromised, it's very hard to replace that, right? And so we need to, as an industry, be working on methods for revocation and to better protect those biometric templates.
Okay, great, thank you. So Max, the ideal of biometrics for access and identity proving has always been predicated on optimal security and optimal convenience. When it comes to actually deployed biometric solutions, the market leaned into convenience and is evolving towards optimal security. Where are we now on that evolutionary path?
Hi there. So I'm really happy to be here today at Money2020. As far as security and convenience, I think it's really interesting. Just to go back to what Dave said when he introduced the panel, was that he thinks about biometric technology primarily as a convenience technology, and for most of us, that's what it is. You know, we really saw a sea change with biometrics being adopted on mobile devices. So we have billions of people literally using biometrics every day, Touch ID, Face ID, or the Android version of that, and so on and so forth. So that is the standard that we're used to, which is biometrics on our mobile phones, and that's a convenience technology. And there's a reason I don't consider it a security technology, which is primarily because I can enroll 5 different people on my phone, and my phone doesn't know the difference. It just knows that those 5 faces actually will authenticate any transactions I want to use on my phone. if you're authenticating yourself to your phone and then you're using your phone to then authenticate yourself to another transaction, that's really a device authentication. The biometrics is what you're using to access your phone, but it's not actually completing the authentication. So I believe that ultimately we need to get to a model where biometrics are the security technology. We're starting to see that evolve now in the marketplace, where we're seeing more centralized use of biometrics. A lot of people get apoplectic when you talk about centralized biometrics for some of the reasons Nat was just talking about, right? So I think we really have to understand, how do you create a biometric solution that is both secure and convenient? And I think we have to do that by building in certain mechanisms into centralized use of biometrics, i.e. you should never store biometric data with other PII. If you have a database where you've got a biometric template with any other PII, that is bad. Don't do that. The other thing too with biometrics, in terms of using them for security, is that if you store biometric templates separately and they're independently stored, if somebody accesses that database and you are worried about using the templates, you can kill those templates, apply a new algorithm, and create new templates. So the idea that your biometrics cannot be revoked, I think, is also not well understood, right? Because we're using templates, we're not using image data. That's important. So I think what we have to do is say, yes, we've got a great foundation because we've got widespread user acceptance and adoption via our mobile phones. And then what's the next step of an evolution to move that from just the convenience on our phone to a more secure environment that will actually allow us to know who is on either end of a payment?
Right. And so in terms of opening the question up to the panel, what are the next steps to achieving that frictionless, high security ideal? Husayn?
Well, I partly disagree in that I don't think the solution to identity will involve anything to do with a database. It will not be centralized. It has to be decentralized. The notion when it comes to identity, given how important it is, in essence, identity underpins all transactions, period. So no matter in any way that you structure a centralized database, eventually it will be hacked and breached. And so the integrity of the system could go away. And therefore, all the activity around the decentralized model, where only the individual is able to store and control their identity, in our view, is the most likely way that it would work. And when it comes to biometrics, I think Dave's point was that biometrics could be used as a convenience technology, but it absolutely isn't necessarily the case. The majority of the use cases on biometrics now is surveillance, profiling, and targeting people. And so even when it comes to biometrics-based, the solution has to ensure that the user's privacy comes first, that nothing like this can be used for ill purposes. And if there's a notion that there will be some sort of tech giant, be it Apple or others, that are going to somehow control everyone's identities, I don't see that being adopted en masse, just because there will be many negative consequences of holding so much power.
Go ahead, Rob.
So I think the whole point of the panel is to have people with different points of view, and I have a different point of view. I actually believe you can't solve the biometric frictionless consumption if you assume that everybody's going to manage on their own devices. Like, how many of you actually effectively manage your identity today? You don't. Like, you do a poor job of managing your identity. Like, there's 7 billion of us on the planet. History has proven we can't do it. We're not capable. We're not going to do it. We've never done it. And it's not going to happen. So in the end, to solve the problem of biometrics, there will be a combination of on-device computing, but also centralized computing. And all we're really afraid about is how to store data. Well, has the planet not figured how to successfully store data? Because a biometric template is just a bunch of zeros and ones. And in fact, if you actually separate the zeros and ones from the human, it doesn't matter. So there will be a world, in my view, and it won't be that far from now, where we actually will have centralized use of zeros and ones in templates that will not be connected to the individual human, so that we're protected, but will allow for a seamless experience of authentication across all kinds of things that we do. We're living in a world right now where we're authenticating one app versus another app versus another app. We're going to get past that. We're going to get to a world where we need to be able to authenticate across everything. And that is not going to happen on a device, in my personal view. Now, I'm only with 15 years of experience in the biometric space, so I still have a lot to learn, and I do see myself as a student. And I also would say that everybody right now thinks the exact opposite of what I just said. But I look over time, and you look at examples that we witnessed in the market, in the payments industry, where you do have to have centralized ability to be able to move templates around across devices. Like if you lose your device, how do you re-enroll? Like how are you going to get through your day? So in order to get to a world where we can authenticate on a continuous basis, yes, we are going to have templates in central databases, and that's going to be okay. And all we have to be able to do is to separate the template from the human, and then just have very strong encryption and very strong management of data, because that's all it is.
Can I just jump in 2 points? I just want to, agree with Rob, and I also want to say that, again, if you're not, as Rob mentioned, you don't store biometrics with the rest of your PII is critically important. And I also think I don't want 16 or 18 different organizations storing my biometrics. I'd rather have one purpose-built, secure data store so that my templates are sitting in that place. And that is the entire business model of the organization that holds them, is to secure them. I don't want it to be Apple or Google or anybody else. It needs to be independent. And the other quick point I wanted to make is on the idea of frictionless. My head kind of explodes when I hear frictionless, and I know it's the F word now that everybody loves, frictionless. I think what's really important to understand is you have to apply the appropriate level of friction to the security or sensitivity of the data. So if I'm buying a Coke out of the vending machine, I don't want any friction. If I'm transferring $10,000 to my good friend Rob, I want a little bit of friction, because I don't want that to happen without my knowing it. I don't want to accidentally push a button and all of a sudden, that money's gone and I don't have a little bit of control over it. And over time, maybe you change those thresholds with what you're comfortable with, but I think it's really important to think about multiple levels of friction.
Right. And speaking of friction, it looks like you disagreed with some of the things that Max said.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to restate Husayn's point, but I agree with that. But as far from my perspective, we will get to less friction with increased use of traditional biometrics that will become more rapid, more accurate, and then we will also get to less friction over time with the use of behavioral biometrics and getting to a state of always authenticated applications. And I think that is where we're going as an industry. I'm very bullish on the increased use of behavioral and the addition of more sensors on the devices that give us better ability to know when we're actually dealing with the same person. So that's how I think we get to less friction, not frictionless, because I don't think frictionless is a truly achievable end state.
Just very quickly, I don't necessarily see a contradiction between what we said, and I'm not suggesting a decentralized model would store it on a private device, but so we're on the same page. I do not think it will be a centralized database. I do not think it will be a private company that will be trusted to own anyone's templates. But on the frictionless side of it, I think of it most like the way you would catch an Uber or Lyft, where you go from point A to B and the payment is taken care of. You can go and check the log of what just happened, but you don't need to think too much about what happened. They just take the payments. And in that way, you'd be able to walk through an airport or check in at your hotel or order a prescription drug or open a bank account in a frictionless way. There'd be a log of everything, but it wouldn't hold you back from gaining access.
Right. I think we've been responding to a lot of the Slido questions as we've been going, talking about data. But I do have one question about privacy regulations like the California Consumer Privacy Act and the BIPA, or Biometric Information Privacy Act. How are these affecting the evolution of biometric solutions in financial services? Rob?
I'll make a couple comments about it. Really, both of those and movements like that are all about allowing us to give permission for our biometrics to be used for some service that we're engaged in. And that's what both of them are fundamentally doing. And from my perspective, or our perspective, that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. We want to be able to make the choice of whether we're prepared to allow our biometric information be used by others. So from my perspective, I think that is the right answer. From an education perspective, I think what it does, though, is people sort of get nervous when they see these sort of movements, and I think it should be the opposite. We should embrace them. All states should do it. All cities should do it. And this is, I think, actually a good thing.
I also think that the vendor community needs to embrace these regulations, and they need to get involved in formulating them in such a way that we can actually create technology that has the privacy constraints that we want built into the technology. So it makes it harder for people with bad intent, to get a hold of our data and do something bad with it. The problem a lot of companies have right now is our data is all stored in relational databases. Relational databases were designed to be mined. That's the whole point. Everything used to be in a ledger, right? So we're basically trying to build security into a database infrastructure that wasn't really designed to be secure. So I think everyone in technology always says this, we need more technology to solve the problem, but I do think we need to take a different approach, a fundamentally different approach to what it means to have data stored in an environment where it's accessible, but it's secure.
Right. So we've got one question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, could I just say one more thing? Here's something we don't want. We don't want biometrics being used for surveillance. That's something we don't want as a people. And in the city of New York City, they've actually made a law that prevents using biometrics for surveillance. Like one of the questions that's being posed here centers around, biometrics being used in China. So one of the things that goes on in China today that I'm dead against is using biometrics for surveillance. They're using that technology to surveil. They can actually identify people blocks away. So this is something that we want to stand against, and that is so using biometrics for authentication to applications or access to buildings, okay, we're good, but not for surveillance.
Yeah, there's many different applications in terms of the biometric industry. And in terms of talking about the future, what is the biometric banking experience of 2025? Husayn?
I don't think the banking experience will be the way that we think about it. I don't think banks will be around in the way that we currently view them, but that's a different panel, I'm sure. The experience of accessing financial services will hopefully be a lot smoother and a lot more frictionless, which has already been mentioned, but it's also across the first financial technology innovation has been a UX one, user experience one. The second one specifically is likely to continue to be targeting the underbanked and unbanked. So the hope is that if you historically have not had access to financial services and you've been financially excluded, well, the precursor to that is that you've been identity excluded. So that more and more people will be able to prove their legal identity and gain access to more and more services.
I think, and this pertains to one of the questions that's coming up about identifying people at enrollment, I think we're going to have an independent means of verifying identity via biometrics. And it is, it's difficult to think about how that's going to happen in the U.S. Certainly in many countries in Europe, for example, they have national ID programs. So we need to work on that in the United States in terms of linking humans to a credentialed identity. But once you have that, I think the enrollment process is going to get a lot easier because we will have an independent means of verifying identity. And then that is going to change the whole process because payments will be about identity, not about this convoluted process where we're doing a lot of strange methods of verification and fraud management through the process. So it really will be about identity.
Yeah, so just to piggyback on Maxine's comment, I mean, FIs will increasingly use biometrics at enrollment to establish the root of trust. Everyone in here who has a driver's license or state-issued ID has gone to a DMV or motor vehicle agency in their state where they have captured a high-quality facial image of you and store that within the state. We are working to enable citizens to request that the state biometrically match them based on a selfie that is taken from the device. So that will become a thing in 2025, as well as I think the notion of the always authenticated state because of the increased use that FIs will have with behavioral and traditional biometric methods.
Right.
Ours is go ahead. So ours is similar in that it's a parallel approach, and that anyone who's been issued a paper-based credential from their government, like a driving license, will be able to enroll in what we call a portable identity. And then once you've been enrolled into a portable identity, you can very easily access any organization that is part of that sort of network, so to speak. But it would only be the user and the individual who owns and controls their legal identity, and only the information that needs to be shared is shared with the relying party or organization that needs to verify you.
So we come together in 2025, and we've concluded that the individual human can't be trusted to manage our own identities. We've concluded maybe that global tech providers are not the answer to protecting our identity. We may have concluded that governments aren't, in fact, who we seek or go to trust our identity. So where are we going? So we've got to be able to, the future from our perspective is that there will be given rise to identity banks. And I'm using the word bank not to say it's a bank that's provisioning money, but it could be. But we must be going to people who we trust, who their primary responsibility is to protect and provision our identity or pieces of our identity at our request. That is the future. That's a future we can all buy into. And truthfully, I'd be happy to pay into it so that I could actually have the trust that this entity is actually representing my best interests. They're not taking my data and doing something else with it, but they're protecting my identity. And one last thing I'll say is that one thing for sure is don't confuse biometrics on your phone for your own company applications as the answer. It may be the answer for convenience, but it is not the answer for trust. So I watch it every day. I marvel at how many people look at their biometrics on the phone, think, I just got to put this onto my app and I'm good. Yeah. No, you're not, actually. The biometrics on the phone are doing a great job of locking your phone, but they haven't done anything towards establishing your trust with the application or the data that you're working with. Yeah. And ultimately, the binding of the trust is what's important. So the answer isn't living just on the device.
Right. And I would just quickly add that I think what we really need is public-private partnership to move towards this concept of an identity bank. I don't think it's either or. I think we have to figure a way to do that is secure and safe for everybody.
Like any conversation around our industry, there's so much to talk about. We just have a few more minutes, so maybe some closing thoughts on this.
It's just I respectfully disagree in that users can't be trusted with our identity. I think, in fact, no one can be trusted with your identity except for the user. It just becomes a question of how frictionless and easy do you make it for that user so they don't have to think about it too much. I do agree that users don't like to think. When it comes to, in a similar way, users aren't necessarily good, or should they be good at getting money and going and paying someone, but you have payment providers that make it a frictionless process in that sense. And the only way forward, given how everyone is waking up to what an important and pivotal role identity is playing, we need to decide, is it going to be centralized databases, is it going to be private companies, is it going to be governments, or ultimately do we have to figure out a way for users and only users to own and control their identity?
One more closing statement, maybe. Max, you want to close it?
Well, I think that I'm with Rob on this. I think the problem with self-management really comes down to the fact that if I'm managing it and I lose it, then it's gone forever, and I have no way to recover that. And I just sort of think about what happened the last time my phone died, and how thankful I was when I got to plug the new one in and everything downloaded and it was all the same. So if we're depending on that kind of solution just to manage the regular data in our phone, I don't know how we go to a system where we're supposed to control our own information.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone on the panel today for joining us in such a great conversation. Thanks.
Thank you.